Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to 30 Broke. Today, we've got something wild for you. We're diving into the movie Last Straw, a 2023 thriller about a restaurant manager who's terrorized by a group of prankster teens. What starts as a silly game quickly turns to a nightmare. You don't want to miss this one, trust me. Grab your popcorn, get comfy, and let's jump into it. Before we start, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any movies. All right, so let's meet our main character, Nancy. She's a young woman who's just found out she's pregnant. Nancy is with her best friend, Tabitha, and tells her that she's positive. When asked who the father of her baby is, Nancy says she doesn't know because she's recently been involved with several men.
You don't know?
Since Nancy works at a restaurant and has a daytime shift, she quickly heads to work. On her way, while Nancy is driving and listening to music, her car suddenly breaks down, forcing her to walk and leave her car on the roadside. As she walks, she runs into her coworker Bobby, who always rides a bicycle to work. To avoid being late, Nancy hops on Bobby's bike and they head to the restaurant. When they arrive, Nancy goes to meet the restaurant owner, who turns out to be her father. Nancy has just been promoted to the restaurant's manager, and her father advises her to be more disciplined so she can set an example for the other employees.
You're a manager now. Coworkers need to look up to you.
Coincidentally, Nancy's father has a date with his new girlfriend today. Nancy's mother has long passed away, and her father feels he needs some love nourishment after being dry for so long. So, Nancy is asked to work overtime until the restaurant closes. While cleaning the tables, Nancy sees leftover food on a customer's plate, which makes her nauseous, and she throws up in the back. Jake, the restaurant's chef and her father's trusted confidant, happens to be nearby and suspects that Nancy might be pregnant. However, when Nancy's father arrives and sees her vomiting, Jake covers for her by saying it was because of rotten meat, so her father doesn't suspect Nancy's pregnancy.
My honor. I'll be right in.
Nancy's father then leaves for his date, while Nancy continues working. Not long after, an employee named Peter accidentally spills some water. Since Peter has a mental disability, Nancy understands his mistake. Shortly after, a group of teenagers on bicycles, who are known to cause trouble, arrives. Nancy, wanting to keep the restaurant's environment peaceful, immediately goes out to drive them all away.
What are you douchebags doing?
Due to her pregnancy, Nancy becomes more sensitive and easily angered. This causes all the employees, including Peter, who doesn't clean up the spilled water right away, to be scolded. Additionally, the teenagers have the nerve to come into the restaurant wearing masks and pretend to order food.
You're disgusting. Can you get the fuck out? I'm serious. Leave.
Realizing they're just messing around, an increasingly furious Nancy threatens to call the police. However, Jake, overhearing Nancy's conversation, knows she's only bluffing and doesn't actually plan to call the police.
See you in 10 minutes.
Nancy then lashes out at all the employees, including Jake, Bobby, Peter, and 2 others. According to her, they should have helped her drive the teenagers away instead of just standing by. Jake, as the restaurant's senior employee, believes the kids were just joking around, and Nancy didn't need to be so harsh.
You're fired.
Who?
You, Jake.
But feeling unappreciated as a manager, Nancy fires Jake, even though he's her father's trusted employee and an important chef at the restaurant. Jake immediately apologizes and explains that he desperately needs the job because he still has bills to pay.
I really need this job. Okay, I got bills and I got insurance and my prescription.
However, Nancy stands by her decision and orders Jake to leave. After firing Jake, Nancy washes her face to calm down. Bobby, meaning well and wanting to check on Nancy, ends up getting yelled at too. Nancy tells him not to act like he cares. Because of her own actions, Nancy ends up working the night shift alone. She then calls her father to tell him she's fired Jake.
I fired Jake.
Hearing this, Nancy's father is shocked because she made such a hasty decision. Even though the menu isn't too complicated and Nancy could handle cooking herself, they will still need time to find an experienced chef like Jake. Nancy could have closed the restaurant and gone home. But the restaurant's finances are in bad shape and there are many bills to pay. To cover all that, the restaurant needs to stay open. So, Nancy reluctantly stays until the morning. With no customers around, Nancy gets bored and plays music, cleaning and even dancing by herself in the restaurant, turning on the disco lights. After dancing, Nancy notices the teenagers' bicycles parked across the street. Realizing they might return to cause trouble, Nancy uses the loudspeaker to threaten them, saying she'll call the police again. But the teenagers get even bolder and start banging on the restaurant windows loudly. This time, Nancy really calls the police because they're going too far. The operator tells her that all units are currently busy dealing with a gruesome murder case elsewhere, so it may take a while for them to send an officer, and only one officer can be dispatched. With no other choice, Nancy has to hold out while waiting for the officer. As she watches the windows, the masked teenagers begin their terror, frightening Nancy. While hiding in the kitchen and searching for her phone, Nancy suddenly hears a police siren. Feeling relieved, Nancy believes she's safe after the officer arrives. The officer patrols the area and finds an open water tap, as if someone had just used it. The officer reports back to headquarters that everything seems under control.
Hey there, this is Sheriff Brooks down at the Fat Bottom Bistro.
When Nancy describes the group of masked teenagers on mopeds, the officer realizes they're the same group involved in the gruesome murder case elsewhere.
Did you say mopeds?
Yeah, and?
The officer tells Nancy that he doesn't want to scare her, but before coming to the restaurant, he had been at the murder scene involving the masked teenagers. While discussing the situation,
Go, go, go!
the officer is suddenly killed by one of the teenagers who enters the restaurant. Nancy hides in the storage room until Bobby appears. Nancy quickly pulls Bobby into the restaurant, and they hide in the kitchen just as one of the teenagers enters. Nancy and Bobby are eventually caught by the teenagers. No! They're tied up and forced to sit facing each other and are made to kiss. As Nancy continues to struggle, she's taken to the back, but she manages to escape. Nancy frees herself and grabs a knife, wounding one of the attackers. Knife in hand, Nancy escapes the restaurant. But as she tries to back away slowly because one of the attackers is riding a moped, Nancy accidentally stabs Peter, who somehow ends up there.
What did you do?
Nancy, along with us as viewers, is shocked to find out that Jake, Bobby, and Bobby's brother Jackson were behind it all. To understand how it happened, let's rewind to the afternoon, right when Nancy fired Jake. It turns out, but before we continue the movie, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Subscribe 30 Broke now. Jake was a drug addict. He needed the job, but not for paying bills or other important expenses, but to buy illegal substances. Peter, who was Jake's younger brother, always had to follow his orders. At that time, they went to buy illegal substances from a dealer. Since Jake had no money, he begged to buy on credit while showing a gun he had in the glove box of his car.
Front of house. You know, man, I only got a dime to my name, but...
On their way back, Jake immediately used the substances. When his mind was no longer clear, he saw a group of masked teenagers on mopeds having a bonfire party on the roadside. Jake decided to approach them.
Go ahead, bro. Tell us a joke.
Instead of joining the party, Jake actually just wanted to say something. He believed that if the teenagers hadn't come to the restaurant, Nancy wouldn't have gotten angry and fired him. In Jake's mind, it was the teenagers' fault that he lost his job. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Jake stabbed one of the teenagers and shot the others in a horrific manner.
Petey, come here! Come here! Petey, get the fuck over here!
The most unfortunate one here was Peter, who didn't know anything but was forced to join his brother in the brutal act. After killing the teenagers, Jake and Peter loaded the mopeds and masks into their car. Jake then instructed Peter to go to the restaurant while he himself would meet Bobby and Jackson at their house. When Jake arrived at Bobby's house,
That's fucked up.
He vented about Nancy's frustrating behavior earlier that day. He then suggested the idea of pranking Nancy by disguising themselves with masks and moats. Bobby and Jackson immediately agreed to the idea. Bobby briefly asked where the masks and moats came from, and Jake replied that he borrowed them from some teenagers hanging out, assuring Bobby not to worry about it.
Sound very calm.
Switching back to Peter, who had already arrived at the restaurant, he noticed that his hands were still covered in blood after being forced to kill the teenagers. Peter decided to wash his hands at the back of the restaurant, explaining the open water tap the police had seen during their inspection. Soon after, Jake and his friends finally arrived at the restaurant. They started their terror by banging on the glass windows, including various acts that frightened Nancy, as we had seen earlier. When the police officer arrived, they all immediately hid. While Nancy and the officer discussed the previous murders, Jake, afraid of being caught, had to hit the officer from behind. This was the moment when Nancy was hiding in the storage room, terrified. Bobby, who happened to witness the event, felt sorry and decided to remove his mask, pretending he had just arrived to help Nancy. From there, the situation spiraled further out of control, eventually leading to Nancy accidentally stabbing Peter, who was actually innocent. Poor Peter. He was only involved because of his selfish brother, Jake. Nancy also shares part of the blame. As a manager, Nancy should have been more wise and not fired someone recklessly just to show authority. Jake ordered Jackson to watch over Nancy while he and Bobby took Peter inside the restaurant to treat his wounds. Seeing Jackson distracted, Nancy quickly escaped to the back of the restaurant. While running away, she stumbled upon a bag of rotten meat and got an idea to use it. Switching to Jake, who was trying to stop Peter's bleeding, Bobby, feeling that things had gone too far, secretly grabbed the police officer's car keys to escape.
I want to know how she was in the sack before I fucking...
At that same moment, Nancy's father, who was on his date, kept trying to call Jake to discuss his firing. In reality, Nancy's father still wanted Jake to work at the restaurant and asked Jake to ignore Nancy's overly emotional decision. But it was already too late. Jake had done too many bad things by then. Besides, his phone was left in the car. Nancy, meanwhile, got involved in a chase with Jackson. She managed to throw hot oil at Jackson and eventually had to kill him. While hiding under the table, Nancy saw Bobby lying on the floor, covered in blood after fighting with Jake. Just then, Tabitha appeared after receiving Nancy's call earlier. But after seeing the terrifying condition of the restaurant, Tabitha decided to leave again. Ignoring Tabitha, Jake immediately chased after Nancy, who had run to the storage room. Just as the sun was rising, Nancy managed to escape. However, Jake caught up to her and stabbed her from behind, then dragged her back into the restaurant, unaware that Nancy was pregnant. Jake stabbed Nancy in the stomach and left her there. But not long after Jake left, Nancy suddenly woke up and was still alive. Thanks to the rotten meat she had wrapped around her stomach with plastic, she had tricked Jake. Though injured, Jake's stab wasn't deep enough. Seeing Bobby gravely injured, Nancy finally admitted that the baby she was carrying was Bobby's, a result of their drunken encounter at a party. Nancy took the police car keys and decided to go to Jake's house to end this nightmare. Without much difficulty, Nancy managed to attack Jake from behind and put an end to it all. Weak from blood loss, Nancy walked back to the restaurant. Shortly after, her father arrived and asked what had really happened.
My baby.
This movie gives us the moral message that decisions made in anger usually lead to bad outcomes. A leader must be able to think calmly, not rushing into decisions just to assert authority. Don't make decisions when angry, and don't make promises when overly happy. Be patient and wise when facing situations so that the decisions made don't lead to disaster. And that's the crazy story of Last Straw. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to smash that like button if you enjoyed this recap. Make sure you're subscribed to 30 Broke so you don't miss our next movie breakdown. See you next time.